Okay, we are live. All right. I don't know if you know, I simultaneously broadcast this class both on the Facebook page of the Tel Aviv International Synagogue as well as on my own Facebook page, as you can tell. So sometimes it takes a bit for them to get into sync, and hence there's a hesitation sometimes at the beginning of the class. Anyways, it's Monday, and it's 1 o'clock, 1:02 actually to be precise, in the land of Israel, and it's time for Pirkei Avot History and Ashkafa, brought to you or brought to you by the Tel Aviv International Synagogue under the inspired leadership of Rabbi Ariel Constantine, and we are in the third chapter of Pirkei Avot. What I'm going to do, it's a short, the Mishnah we're going to discuss is a short Mishnah. So I would like to divide our discussion today in two parts. First of all, we'll talk about the Mishnah, and then there's an insight which I sort of came up with recently with regard to the mitzvah of loving converts and how one treats converts, how one treats Gerim, which I'd like to share with you in anticipation of the upcoming festival of Shavuot, which is the holiday devoted to conversion, because at the end of the day, as we'll see in a minute, the original Jews, the children, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, underwent a conversionary experience at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given, and just as is the case with people who nowadays come from the outside and they decide to join our people, to join our covenantal community. So, anyways, that's what we're going to do today. The Mishnah that we are considering is just the next one in line, and it is Rabbi Chalafta. I'm sorry. Where'd it go? Oh, Rabbi Lazar Ish Bartota or Bartita used to say, "Ten lo mishalo, give him that which is his, shata v'shelcha shalo, because both you and that which you own belongs to him." V'chein b'David hu omer, and the same thing is said of King David, ki mimcha hakol u'miyadcha nitnu lecha. Everything comes from you, and everything has been given from your hand. There are a number of ways of understanding this Mishnah. Clearly, it's a statement about the nature of private property and the ultimate ownership of the world. Interestingly, there is throughout rabbinic literature, throughout the Bible, throughout rabbinic literature, there's something of I don't know if it's a mixed message about the nature of private property. And it starts with a conundrum. The conundrum is because on the one hand, God owns the world. Why does God own the world? Well, as Rav Soloveitchik points out in a comment that he made on the first verse in Genesis, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, in the beginning of God's making the heaven and the earth was void and so on, but God created the world. We are the owners of our creations. A painter who's not on commission, say, a painter who creates a beautiful work of art. A painter who creates a beautiful work of art is they own the painting, so they'll sell it to be able to make money because it belongs to them. A person who owns a book, who wrote a book, who created a book, the book belongs to them. It has to, because there are unscrupulous people in the world. You have to get a copyright. But in principle, it belongs to the person who created it. If you create something, it becomes yours, because you basically brought it into being. You imprint your personality and your talents on that thing, so it's yours. So God, so a fortiori, the world belongs to God. That's on the one hand, and because of that assumption, we have a whole bunch of different mitzvot, and a whole different attitudes, which reflect that fact that ultimately we really don't own anything. I mean, yeah, you can get dark and say yes, as my mother-in-law used to say to other people, never to me. Shrouds don't have pockets. You can't take it with you, stuff like that. But in a more formal sense, it definitely is something to the fact that we don't own anything. So, for example, there is a mitzvah, there's a commandment which is applies actually this year in the land of Israel called Shemitah. The Jubilee, not the Jubilee, I'm sorry, the sabbatical year. Every 7 years, we're not allowed to perform agricultural work because the land does not belong to us. God says, God, Kili kol haaretz v'gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. You are strangers. You're sort of I don't say freeloaders. You're temporary residents here, but ultimately I'm the landowner, and therefore every 7 years I tell you you can't use it. Yes, there are ways to get around it, and those are invoked in Israel in order to be able to continue agriculturally, because it would put agriculture in danger. And interestingly, this past year, people were saying, "Well, what do we need to do this? What do? You sell the land to a non-Jew, and then the land is no longer the land of Israel, or it doesn't have sanctity, and therefore you can work it because it's not, the land of Israel. It's like selling chametz before Pesach." And a lot of people say, "No, why do we need this? We need to. Our economy won't tank if we don't, do agriculture." And then comes the war in Ukraine, and we're facing a grain and corn and all kinds of God knows what else kind of shortage. But all right, nobody could foresee that last year when the preparations for Shemitah were there. But the rationale for Shemitah is you don't own your land, and people, by the way, who are not commercial farmers, don't touch their land. I mean, my backyard, which used to have beautiful flowers and vegetables and whatever, it just looks terrible because it's not mine right now. Because the point is, I abandon it, I let it go to seed. Or if there's something growing, anybody who wants to come can come in my backyard and take it because I don't really own it. My ownership of the land was suspended. So that's one kind of, that's one expression of this sort of like binary situation. Then you have the obvious example. The obvious example is the example of blessings. The Talmud tells us in Tractate Brachot, which deals with prayers and blessings and all kinds of stuff, that basically when one says a blessing, why do you have to say a blessing? Why do you have to say a bracha? So the way that the Talmud explains it one way, is that basically it's a transaction. The world belongs to God. The pasuk, the verse says, "Lashem haaretzum lo'ah tevel v'yoshveva," that the world belongs to God and everything that's in it. And then there's a pasuk that says, "Hashemayim shamayim Lashem," the heavens pertain to God, or belong to God, and v'haaretz natan bnei adam, and the land has been given to people. How can how do you square the contradiction between that? It's either all his or there's a division. Says the Talmud that up until the time that you want to eat something, for example, then the world belongs to God. You pay him, as it were. You in exchange for acknowledging his ultimate ownership, or his ultimate authorship, or his ultimate creation of the world, that actually allows you to take possession of the apple, whatever the case may be, and then be able to eat it. So, on the one hand, there's this, and on the one hand, there's that. So that's one way. Now, the story of the blessing actually takes us to stage 2, and that is that the Torah does respect personal property. Personal property is a big deal in Jewish law, and possession is 9/10 of the law according to Halacha. It's interesting. There is even a statement by Maimonides that talking about almost the intense or the intimate relationship between a person's person, their body or their mind or their soul, and their possessions. Because at the end of the day, is recognition that since we're allowed to buy things and to have things that are in this world, that's why the world was created, according to the Bible. that what we own is sort of an extension of ourselves. It's not that we are what we eat, which is a terrible statement. We don't become a cow. I mean, you're not supposed to become a cow. You might know people who act like cows, but that's another story. But rather, they are extensions of ourselves. When we choose things to purchase, we always do it, in accordance with our taste. So therefore, things that we own are an expression of us. And therefore, there's even a very powerful statement by Maimonides in the Laws of Theft, in which he says, if a person comes and steals from you, it's not just a question they took something, they incurred a financial loss. There's an element of bloodshedding, of manslaughter, of sort of personal hurting, harm done to the a personal sense of violation. There's the word, a personal sense of violation to the guy who's stolen from, because it's not just it's mine. This was something which I bought, something into which I gave thought and invested, and said, oh, this is the thing which best suits me, and you hit. And by violating that which is an extension of me, you actually violate. Okay. Now it's in that context that ultimately the origin and owner of the world is God, and on the other hand, we are allowed to have ownership, of suspendable ownership of the land or of anything that we own. That Rabbi Elazarish Bartotas or Bartitas, Bartutis, statement comes in. Tein lo mishalo. In other words, we are privileged to own things. But therefore, we are bidden by God to use the things that we own for good. We're obliged to use those things, not to be selfish. But it's got to come from you. In other words, it's a learning experience. I mean, when I was a little kid, we used to went to Hebrew school we went to Hebrew school 5 days a week, but that's unique. But even so, even those who only went once a week. I don't know if it's still true, but we went to Hebrew school. So every week, my mother or my father would give us a dime or a quarter or a nickel, and you would bring it for tzedakah. You would bring it for tzedakah, for what was called Keren Ami, the fund of my people's fund, the national fund. And sometimes it went for JNF to plant trees. At the time, buying a tree cost $1. So for 10 straight weeks, you brought a dime, and then you got and you put it in like a little little cardboard thing, and then you got a certificate that you planted a tree in Israel. What is that? What was that? The parent gives the child a dime. This is now your dime. But the purpose of the dime is to give tzedakah. The purpose of the dime is to give to others. And the lesson that's supposed to be imparted is, yes, you will have your own things. You will have your own possessions. You will have your own money. But that money has also to be used for good. You can't keep it to yourself, because ultimately you are, like with Hebrew National, you are obligated to obey a higher authority. So that what Rabbi Elazar seems to be saying is, you may be blessed with wealth, you may not be blessed with wealth, but whatever you have is a privilege. And whatever you have has to be given for, if it's the case of giving tithes, and you live in Israel and you give to the Kohen or so on, but it means giving tzedakah. Tzedakah is a commandment, even though it's my money, right? And if somebody steals it from me, I can have him arrested and whatever, and pay me reparations or whatever. Doesn't matter. The Torah can demand that you have to give it because it's also ultimately God's. And somebody gave it to you. And there is something of a contradiction there, or of a tension there? Yes. Life's full of tensions. Life's full of contradictions, or multiple motives. Interestingly, so that's generally the way that that this Mishnah is understood. There aren't so many variations among the commentators. It's one of those Mishnayot that really is not historical because it's perpetual. It's always there. The question is always there. The issue is always there. There's always poor people or people in need. And I don't know about you. I mean, there's more than enough occasions to be able to give tzedakah. I find myself of late not knowing what to do with the number of heart-wrenching and heartbreaking videos that pop up on various things that I do, showing little kids that have cancer and they need money, and you just don't know, you don't know how to prioritize, because at the same time, interestingly, you're not allowed to give everything away to tzedakah. You have to take care of yourself first. So that's also another issue of the balance between taking care of yourself, which is also a mitzvah, and giving to others. This is not this is a very complex situation here. Okay. So that is really, I think, the upshot of this Mishnah. Oh, I was going to say one more thing. So interestingly, there is another theme that arises in the commentaries to this Mishnah, and that is reminds me of a book of an old song by a protest folk singer. His name was Phil Oakes, that I loved when I was a kid. He was popular during the Vietnam War, during the student movement of the late 60s, late 70s. The commentaries, I'll tell you in a minute why that is. So the commentaries to the Mishnah say it's not just giving money. You have to give of yourself. There were two different mitzvahs in the Torah when it comes to your responsibility of giving of yourself to the rest of the world. One is tzedakah, give money. And by the way, tzedakah is not a choice. Tzedakah is a demand. Tzedakah means justice. You know, a choice to do justice or not. Charity requires being moved to do it, and then you see these videos, or in the old days of the Jerry Lewis telethon, you used to see these kids with muscular dystrophy. But they were there in order to be able to get people to have compassion and give money. In Judaism, no, you just have to give something if you're asked, and that's all. But then there's Gemilut Chasadim. Then there's acts of loving kindness. That's where you go in and you do. You do things which can't be done just by writing a check or making a bit payment or PayPal. It's something that you'd have to do and get your hands dirty with it, whether it's working in a soup kitchen, whether it's volunteering to volunteer for anything. Where in Israel, the big one popular way of volunteering and doing is for volunteering on the ambulance corps or things of a medical nature. It means helping an next door neighbor. It helps a person who may need things. If there's an older person who needs help, just volunteering to get them their medicine, whatever the case might be. That's giving of yourself, means of yourself physically, your arms, your legs, your time, your the things that are the most intimate parts of you, because God created men and women as well, not just the money, not just possession. And in fact, Gemilut Chasadim, giving of yourself physically, time-wise, emotionally, is on a higher level than giving tzedakah, than giving money. Or as I said, one of the famous songs that this Phil Oakes used to sing. It's called "To Love Me, I'm a Liberal." And at the end of the song, he says, "And I'll send all the money you ask for, but don't ask me to go on along." That's the hypocrisy, because the two are connected. Giving money and being involved are two expressions. They're two sides of the same coin, of the recognition of the fact that what we have is not ultimately theirs, and that God and society can make demands of us. We are not totally autonomous, as opposed to what the outside world might say today, that everybody's totally autonomous. No, we are born both with rights and with obligations, and those obligations are non-compromising. And that's why he quotes King David, who was a king, right? So he had to do this too, even though he still had to do it too. What was the pasuk? Keep mimcha hakol miyadchad nagnu lecha. Everything comes from God, and everything comes from God's hand. So that is as far as the Mishnah is concerned. Now I'd like to close in the last 9 minutes that we have by sharing with you an insight I had with regard to the commandment to love the convert. Converts have a very difficult time of it. I don't know if anybody knows a convert, if many of you are Garian. And the Torah knew this in advance. And the rabbis like to point out, rabbis like to point out that the sages in the Talmud pointed out that on 36 occasions, the Torah says, do not hurt the feelings of a convert, of a stranger, because they feel vulnerable, and don't be insensitive, and all kinds of stuff. Now, and that's fine. That's very true. Okay, good. There's no question. But being sensitive to the needs of another person, or being merciful or compassionate, is not love. It's valuable, but it's not love. Love requires a relationship. Love requires an object. Love is a higher level of relating to another person than compassion. Rabbi, it's a little bit off example, but the late Rav Adin Steinsaltz, in the commentary on the Torah commentaries of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, says, you can have compassion on the dead lizard because it died, but you're not going to love the dead lizard. It's a different emotion. So yeah, the Torah it takes its first step at trying to make sure you don't hurt the feelings or be sensitive to the feelings of the person who's just trying to move in, and they feel like they don't belong, and you have to make them feel at home, and all that is true, but that's not love. So what is involved when the Torah does say love the convert? What does it mean? What does it mean? So I would like to share with you an insight that I had, which is based on a grammatical insight which a teacher of mine, Professor Bernard Septimus, once noted, and I will mention what it is in a second to you. But in order to do so, I need to read to you a passage from Maimonides. Anybody knows me knows how it starts with Maimonides. Okay. The Maimonides in the 13th chapter of the Book of Holiness says as follows. There were three actions that were required to allow the children of Israel to enter the covenant. Oh, I think, you know what? I think I have an English translation, so it'll make life a little bit easier. Yes. I forgot I had this. Okay. Sorry to be, I think he has it here. This is the Maimonides reader of my teacher, Professor Isidore Twersky. Nope, doesn't have it here, so too bad. So there are three things a person has to do in order to be able to convert. One is if it's a male, to undergo circumcision. Both men and women have to be immersed in a mikveh, and when there's a temple, you bring a sacrifice. Okay, and then he goes on and discusses how do I know this? And then he adds, then he throws in the most important passage. V'chein lidorot, and so it is in all subsequent generations. Kishiyirtzeh ha'akom, when a non-Jew wants to enter into the covenant, and to envelop himself under the wings of the holy presence, and he accepts the burden or the yoke of the Torah, he needs circumcision and immersion in a mikveh, and bring up sacrifice. And so woman, immersion in a mikveh and a sacrifice. How do I know that the same procedure that the Israelites underwent at Mount Sinai applies to converts today? Shneamar kachem kager. That on one occasion the Torah says that you are just like converts, or you should be treated just like converts. Now, the double comparison, there's a word kaf twice here. The letter kaf exists here twice. The use of the kaf here is somewhat unusual and far more indicative, far more important, and far more repercussive than one would think. One could interpret that verse. One could interpret that verse on the face of it by saying, yeah, okay, the Torah is just simply saying, en passant, that you should do the converse, undergo the same process as the Israelites did in the 13th century on the way out of Egypt at the foot of Mount Sinai. The problem is that other occasions when this sort of like emphasized double kaf, kachem kager, comes up, it means more than that. It means absolute and total identity. It means that the status of an Israelite at Mount Sinai is precisely the same. And the experience of that Israelite is precisely the same as that of the person who joins the Jewish people later. Now let's think about that for a minute. Let's think about that for a minute. The Israelites went out of Egypt. The rabbis tell us that not all of them wanted to go. In fact, on the contrary, according to Rashi, 80% of the Israelites in Egypt decided, I like it here. I prefer it here. I'm Egyptian. Yeah, I'm a slave, but someday I'm going to get out and I'm going to get to the top, and I'm not going with you. I'm Egyptian. I'm not an Israelite. You guys can go and do whatever you want. I'd rather be a slave in Egypt to the greatest power on earth than to be an Israelite and go off in the desert with this crazy man Moses. The 20% who left, it was hard for them. They also got pushed, but they made a principled decision to leave everything that they knew. And it's hard for a slave. Everything that they knew and everything that they had known, to commit themselves to God, to commit themselves to a people, and to go follow Moses, first to Sinai and then to the conquest of the land of Israel, where they would set up a land according to the Torah. That was a commitment which was existential in nature. And it meant leaving behind members of the family who said, we're not going with you. What are you, crazy? We think that it was all a party because we watched the Ten Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille, but this was not easy. And it required guts and gumption and commitment. And that's exactly what Gerim today have to do too. They essentially fulfill the blessing that was given by Moses to Levi, that they ignored their families to do the right thing. So the verse says, that they told their parents, I don't know who you are, and they alienated themselves from their brethren and from their children, because the first thing for them was to join the covenant, or to protect the covenant in that case, of God. And so the same thing with the convert who gives up everything, and it's not easy. And it remains not easy. And nevertheless, it's an act of incredible courage. It's an act of incredible bravery. So on that level, Kachem Kager, both you and the Gerim, I mean the original Jews, and the Gerim are on the same level, except they're not. Except they're not. Because people that are born Jews have a very bad tendency to be snobby, to be suspicious, and to discriminate mildly, but still hurtfully, against those who had to do what those of us who were lucky enough to be born Jews had to do 3,500 years ago. They do it now and undergo it every day. I think that's so. What's Ahavat Hagir? Maimonides, final again. Maimonides, the Rambam in the end of the first book of the Mishnah Torah talks about coming to know God, and he says, "Lefia deya," that you basically you only know God to the degree that you understand Him or you're intimate with Him. How that works is another story. It's not relevant right now. But that is true in human relations as well. You can't really love a person if you don't know them, if you don't identify with them, if you don't understand them, if you don't understand what's going on with them in their heads. The mitzvah of Ahavat Hager, then, if you want to love a ger, you have to appreciate them. You have to find out what they're about. You have to give them support. You have to be there in order to support them when they have to deal with the drastic changes in their lives. And the idea of the Ahavat Hager of loving the convert, is that by us understanding and becoming intimate with them and knowing what they need and what they have and what they've done and what they've given up in order to be able to be part of our people, from that intimacy and knowledge, as the Rambam says, according to one version, L'fiadeya tiyeh ha'ava. To the degree that there's knowledge, and that doesn't just mean like objective knowledge, it means intimate knowledge, and support, and appreciation, we can grow, those of us who were born Jews, and they will feel supported, and together on Shavuos, everybody can recommit themselves to the original covenant. I think that's what Ahavat Hager is about. Anyways, we will resume here after Shavuot. Oh, no, we won't. Well, yes, we will, but those of you who are watching from Chutz La'aretz will see it on Tuesday. In the meantime, be well, and Chag Sameach.